Hey everyone, in today's video, get ready for a stunning story that will challenge everything you believe. Let's meet Gideon Caulfield, a skeptical surgeon who dedicated his life to science, but whose view of the world was transformed after suddenly dying during a lecture. He found Jesus, received revelations that science cannot explain, and returned with a powerful mission for humanity. What he saw on the other side will leave you speechless. So, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any content like this. Now, get ready for this intense and transformative journey. My name is Gideon Caulfield. For more than 3 decades, I was a cardiac surgeon at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. My career was my world, and I was convinced that science had all the answers. I worked tirelessly to save lives, handling cutting-edge scalpels, defibrillators, and medications. I was awarded, recognized, respected, and at times feared by my colleagues because of my almost obsessive perfectionism. I didn't believe in anything other than what could be measured, tested, and proven. When a patient passed away, I told myself that it all ended there. To me, the last visions or feelings reported by those who almost died were nothing more than chemical reactions, neuronal explosions of a dying brain. I explained this myself in lectures, presenting studies and graphs. But even with all my success, there was an emptiness that I never admitted. My marriage failed years ago, and my relationship with my only son, James, was distant. He always said that I prioritized work above all else. On the morning of February 3rd, the day started like any other. Winter in Minnesota was brutal, and the wind cut like knives. Despite this, the Mayo Clinic auditorium was packed. I went on stage to talk about advances in cardiac resuscitation, an irony that I would only realize later. The room was full of doctors, students, and researchers. With the microphone in hand, I began the talk. Gentlemen, today we will talk about how science has given us the power to defy death. Minutes later, while explaining the survival curve in cases of heart attack, I felt a searing pain in my chest. My heart felt like it was being crushed by an invisible hand. I faltered, trying to grab the pulpit. "Dr. Caulfield, are you okay?" I heard someone ask from the audience. Before I could respond, everything went blurry, and I fell to the ground. That was the last thing I saw, or at least, the last thing I saw with physical eyes. As my consciousness began to fail, I still heard voices around me, muffled, as if I were submerged in water. The pain in my chest was unbearable, radiating to my left arm. A blur of worried faces surrounded my body. It was then that everything went dark, as if a switch had been turned off. When I came to where something strange happened, I opened my eyes and saw myself on the floor. Yes, my body was lying inert, but I was watching it from above. My perspective was impossible. I was floating above everything. The scene was chaotic. Dr. Evelyn Harrow, my colleague and former student founder, was kneeling over my body, desperately trying to initiate resuscitation maneuvers. She shouted orders. "Bring the defibrillator now. 200 joule charge." Other doctors rushed to help her, positioning electrodes on my chest. "Clean up," she ordered. My body jumped slightly from the shock, but the line on the monitor remained straight. No pulse. I watched everything without fear, without pain, just with a calm curiosity. It was strange and fascinating at the same time. I remembered something I always said in my lectures. Consciousness is a product of the brain. When it stops, we cease to exist. However, there I was, conscious, watching everything happen. Evelyn insisted, "Another load, 300 joules. We won't give up." I watched her deliver another shock, but my body remained still. There was no despair in me, just a calm acceptance, like I was being prepared for something bigger. It was then that I noticed a presence next to me. It was as if someone invisible was watching me, waiting patiently. I didn't see anyone, but I felt their presence, radiating a peace I had never known. Meanwhile, the doctors tried again. I heard Evelyn scream, "Last try. Let's turn it up to 360. It was at that moment that something even more extraordinary happened. I felt a force pulling me away from the scene. An intense, warm, comforting light began to fill my peripheral vision. The sound of voices in the monitor faded away, and I was being taken in a completely different direction, to a place that human words could hardly describe. The light that enveloped me was unlike any I had ever experienced. It wasn't just visible. She had a presence. It was alive, almost as if it were a conscious entity. Its intensity did not blind me. but filled every part of me with an indescribable sense of peace and love. I was being pulled by this light through a tunnel. It was a space that seemed infinite, while at the same time making me feel protected, as if I were inside a cocoon. The tunnel wasn't cold or dark. It was warm, welcoming, and radiated soft, translucent colors, gold, white, and a faint touch of blue. As I moved, I noticed that my sense of time and space was changing. There was no longer a clear line between past, present, and future. It was like everything was happening at once, but I didn't feel confused. Every moment felt perfectly synchronized, like a piece of a gigantic puzzle. Suddenly, visions began to appear around me. They weren't like ordinary memories. They were more vivid, more real. I saw moments of my life, me holding my newborn son, my mother's smile as she hugged me as a child, the look of relief from a patient who had survived a complicated surgery. These images flooded me with a sense of purpose that I had never felt before. But then, there were also moments of regret. I saw the face of James, my son, turning away from me in our last argument. His expression hurt. I noticed the emptiness in my ex-wife's eyes during our divorce, something I had ignored at the time. Every selfish decision, every moment I prioritized my career over the people I loved, was there, exposed. As painful as it was, the light around me didn't judge me. On the contrary, she seemed to say, "This is part of who you are, and yet you are loved." As I progressed, the light began to intensify, and I became aware of a presence in the distance. It was someone waiting for me at the end of the tunnel. I didn't know who I was, but the feeling of love and acceptance emanating from this figure was irresistible. I continued moving toward presence, feeling my heart, or whatever my essence was at that moment, pulse with anticipation. At the end of the tunnel, a figure appeared, bathed in a light so pure that it seemed to radiate the very essence of love. As I got closer, I noticed details that still leave me speechless today. He had a serene but firm face, with features that seemed to transcend cultures and eras. Her skin was a light olive tone, with light brown hair that shone under the light, as if each strand contained a golden reflection. His eyes were indescribable, changing from amber to blue, deep as the ocean, radiating compassion, wisdom, and something beyond any human explanation. He called me by name. "Gideon, you were faithful in your search for truth. Now the time has come to know a greater truth." His voice was not just a sound, it was a vibration that resonated throughout my being. When he spoke, I felt as if my heart, or my soul perhaps, was being flooded with love so intense that tears began to flow. Even though I didn't have a physical body to cry them, I didn't need to ask who he was. Before I even approached completely, I knew I was standing before Jesus, not the Jesus that I dismissed as myth or religious dogma, but a living presence, which transcends any religion or belief. "How is that possible?" I asked, without even realizing I was speaking. He smiled, a smile full of understanding. "Because love is the basis of everything, Gideon. You have dedicated your life to science, but there are truths that it cannot yet measure." He raised his hand and lightly touched my forehead. The instant he did so, a flood of knowledge flooded my mind. It was as if all of creation, from the beginning of the universe to the farthest future, was before me. I saw the cosmos not as a cold, empty space, but as a living organism, pulsing with energy and love. I understood that linear time, past, present, and future, was just an illusion. Everything exists simultaneously in an eternal now. Jesus then showed me scenes from his own life, not the stories I knew superficially from Scripture, but profound, intimate moments. I saw him talking to Maria, his mother, as he explained the mission before him. I saw him healing a sick child, not just physically, but spiritually transforming everyone around him. And, most shockingly, I saw him in his moment of greatest suffering on the cross, feeling not only the physical pain, but the emotional and spiritual pain of all humanity. "Why show me this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Because, Gideon, you always sought to save lives, but you never understood what it really means to live. You'll see more, and when you return, you'll have a new mission." He moved away slightly, and the scene began to change, taking me to places that further challenged my understanding. When Jesus walked away, I felt the light around me change. She was still intense, but now there was a tension in the air, as if she was being prepared for something challenging. He extended his hand, and I took it without hesitation. "Gideon, there's something you need to see," he said. His voice was soft, but carried a seriousness that made me catch my breath. Suddenly, we were transported to a place that left me speechless. The environment was dark, cold, and colorless. There was no fire, as so many descriptions of hell suggest, but an overwhelming emptiness. It was a space that seemed infinite and yet claustrophobic. There were people there, but they were not physical bodies. They looked like shadows, contorted in their own pain and suffering. Is this hell?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It is the state of complete disconnection from divine love," Jesus replied, with sadness in his eyes. "It is not an imposed punishment, but a choice. These souls turned away from the light, refused love, and stuck to their own pain and illusions. I looked around and realized that each person was alone, isolated in their own bubble of suffering. I saw a man holding what looked like a pile of coins. He murmured desperately, as if each coin had an unbearable weight. He dedicated his life to greed, forgetting to love," Jesus explained. There were others, each trapped in a cycle of resentment, hate, or regret. My heart felt heavy when I saw them. Then everything changed again. I was enveloped by a light so intense it almost blinded me. When my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in an indescribably beautiful place. It was the complete opposite of what I had just seen. The sky was a vibrant space, filled with colors I had never seen before, and heavenly music that seemed to touch every fiber of my being. "This is where souls find peace and unity," said Jesus. "There is no separation. There is no ego. Everything is connected in love." I saw people, but they were not just physical forms. They were like essences, radiating their own light. A woman approached me, and as I looked into her eyes, I felt as if I had known her soul for millennia. "Who is she?" I asked, excited. "A spirit that has been with you on many journeys," said Jesus, enigmatically. "In heaven, you find yourself in others." Jesus explained that heaven is not a physical place, but a state of being, where the soul is aligned with divine love. I understood that the choices made on earth shape our journey, but there is always a chance for redemption, for a return to love. As I watched, my heart seemed to explode with gratitude and understanding. But then, Jesus told me it was time to return. "You have something to accomplish, Gideon. Your time here is over for now, but you will take these truths with you." Everything started to go dark again, as I felt a force pulling me back into my body. As the light around me began to fade, I felt a mix of conflicting emotions: gratitude for the experience I had just had, and an inexplicable sadness as I realized I was being called back. Before I could fully process what was happening, Jesus' presence became even more intense, as if he wanted to convey something crucial to me before I left. He looked at me directly, his eyes shifting from amber to blue in a dance of compassion and power. "Gideon, your journey is not over yet. There is much to be done in the world you know," he said, his voice carrying a gravity that resonated with my being. "But how can I go back after all this? After feeling peace, love, truth?" I asked, my voice breaking. Jesus smiled, a smile that mixed understanding and a slight sadness. "Because you now carry something that few carry, the certainty that there is more beyond what the eyes can see. You were chosen to share this certainty, to be a bridge between science and spirituality." He touched my shoulder, and in that instant, a flood of images flooded my mind. I found myself back in my body, transformed, talking to others who were facing the pain and fear of death. I saw conference rooms, hospitals, and even churches, where I shared my experience, not to convince, but to inspire. "Your life until now has been dedicated to saving physical hearts," he continued. "Now you must heal spiritual hearts. Show the world that science and divine love are not opposites, but parts of the same whole." I was so overcome with emotion that I fell to my knees. "I am not worthy of this. How can I be able?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. Jesus leaned down and cupped my face with both hands, his eyes fixed on mine. "It's not about being worthy, Gideon. It's about being willing. The love you have found here is infinite, and it will flow through you if you let it." One last vision was given to me. It was my son, James. He was smiling, something I hadn't seen in years. I realized that part of my mission was to restore what had been lost between us. "Come back, Gideon, and take this love to the world. He will be your compass, your strength, With those words, everything around me began to disappear. The light, the presence, the heat, everything faded as a powerful force pushed me back into the physical world. The impact of the return was abrupt, almost violent. It was like being pulled by a powerful current, ripped from a state of absolute peace and thrown back into a heavy, limited place. Suddenly, I was on the auditorium floor again, surrounded by the incessant sound of heart monitors and agitated voices. My first sensation was pain, not just in my chest but in every part of my body. The air invaded my lungs with brutal force, as if I were relearning how to breathe. The overhead fluorescent light seemed overly bright, almost unbearable. "He's back. Regular sinus rhythm," cried Evelyn Harrow, relieved. I opened my eyes, blinking against the brightness. The first thing I saw was Evelyn's face, with tears streaming down her face. She held my hand tightly, as if anchoring my soul back into my body. "Dr. Caulfield, you gave us quite a fright," she said, her voice choked with emotion. My mind was still in a state of confusion. I knew where I was, but at the same time, it was like I was seeing everything from the outside. The memories of what I had just experienced were vivid, like a film recorded in my being. I looked at Evelyn and, for the first time, I noticed something I had never noticed before. The love and compassion in her eyes, something I had always spent my life ignoring in others. "How long?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse. 17 minutes and 2 seconds, she replied, still holding my hand. "You had no pulse, no brain activity. It was a miracle." Miracle, a word I never used, but now made sense. I remembered Jesus' words, "Take this love to the world," and at that moment I understood that I was there for a greater reason. The room was silent now. Doctors and nurses looked at me with expressions of disbelief and relief. To them, I was just another case of successful resuscitation. But for me, it was much more than that. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart beat with renewed strength. I touched my chest, still hot and painful from the shocks of the defibrillator. "I'm back," I whispered to myself. But inside me, I knew he wasn't the same man who had left. I had brought something back with me, something that would change my life forever. After my initial recovery, transformation began to unfold in subtle and impactful ways. At first, they were small moments, pauses to watch the sky through the hospital window, thank the medical team who took care of me, or simply notice the sound of my heart beating. I had never appreciated these things before. I was released from the hospital a week later, with strict instructions to rest, but rest was the last thing on my mind. My experience never left my mind. The tunnel of light, the encounter with Jesus, the visions of love and human suffering. It all felt as real as the ground I was walking on, but the implications of it were hard to process. My first attempt at reconnection was with my son James. Our relationship had been broken for years, marked by arguments about my absence and my obsessive dedication to work. He lived in Denver, and at that point I hadn't seen him in 3 years. I picked up the phone with a hesitation I didn't usually feel. After a few rings, his voice answered, cold and distant. "Good?" There was a long silence. It was as if we were trying to measure the emotional distance between us. Finally, I said, "James, I know this call may seem strange, but I need to see you. I don't know where to start, but I want to try to make things right." Another silence. Then, he replied, with less harshness in his voice, "I'll think about it." I knew it would be a long road, but for the first time, I felt like I had time to repair, to build something new. The next day, I reached out to my friend and colleague, Sarah Montgomery. She had always been a stable presence in my life, someone who understood me even when I was lost in my own arrogance. When I told her about my experience, her eyes widened, and she shook her head in disbelief. "Do you really believe you saw Jesus?" he asked, hesitantly. "I don't just believe it, Sarah. I know. And I know my entire life has led to this moment. I need to do something with this." It was at this meeting that we began discussing the idea of the Near-Death Experience Research Institute. The concept of uniting science and spirituality was something I had never imagined before, but now it seemed inevitable. My transformation was underway. It wasn't just about sharing my experience, but living differently, with more love, purpose, and reconnecting with those I had neglected. The concept of a research institute dedicated to near-death experiences, NDEs, seemed, at first glance, impossible to achieve. Still, The idea wouldn't leave me. I knew I needed to give tangible purpose to the transformation I had experienced, so I dove headfirst into this project, determined to unite science and spirituality in a way that would be respected and understood by both fields. The first step was to gather a group of curious and open minds. I confided again in Sarah Montgomery, who had become my confidant upon my return. She suggested that we start with a small team of neuroscientists, psychologists, and theologians. Convincing them, however, was a challenge. At our first meeting, I found myself in a familiar environment, a conference room packed with experts, all looking at me skeptically. I, who previously dominated such situations with impeccable scientific arguments and statistics, felt vulnerable. Dr. Caulfield, with all due respect, how do you expect science to validate something so subjective? Asked a neuroscientist, crossing his arms. I took a deep breath and smiled. All my life, I trusted science to explain everything. But what I experienced was not a brain failure or a chemical process. It was something that transcended any scientific model we know. And I believe that if we explore these experiences with an open mind, we can learn more about the nature of consciousness and perhaps about our own existence. There were murmurs around the room, but I saw something in their eyes. Curiosity. That was enough to start. The institute started modestly, with a room borrowed from the Mayo Clinic and a small amount of funding that Sarah obtained through contacts in the field of medical research. We developed partnerships with universities and hospitals, studying reports of NDEs from a scientific and spiritual perspective. We used advanced technology like functional MRI to map brain patterns in patients who had had these experiences. But the research wasn't just about the data. For me, hearing people's stories was the most transformative aspect. Each story was unique, but they all shared a common element: love. Love was at the center of all experiences, whether in the form of light, divine presence, or a universal feeling of connection. Despite initial criticism, the Institute began to gain recognition. We published articles in respected scientific journals, and I began speaking at events, sharing both my personal experience and research results. The most surprising thing was realizing that I wasn't just helping others understand what they had experienced. I was also healing myself, one step at a time. The years following my near-death experience were the most transformative of my life. While Dr. Gideon Caulfield from before was a man controlled by logic and science, Dr. Gideon Caulfield of now was someone who saw life through a completely new lens, the lens of love, compassion, and spirituality. The Near-Death Experience Research Institute. It has grown beyond my initial expectations. It became a space where science and spirituality met, uniting researchers, doctors, psychologists, and people who had experienced NDEs. Everyone brought their stories and visions, and each one was a reminder that human consciousness transcends the limitations of the physical body. However, the most significant impact was not professional, but personal. My relationship with my son, James Dar, has undergone a renaissance. When we finally met, months after my initial call, he greeted me cautiously. "Why now, Father?" he asked, looking directly into my eyes. "You had a whole life to be there, but you chose work over me." His honesty hurt, but I knew he was right. "Because now I see things differently, James," I replied, my voice shaking. "I want to redeem myself, not just with words, but with actions." It was a slow process, but over time, James began to trust me again. Our relationship blossomed, and he even became one of my biggest supporters, helping me share my story with others. The journey also gave me a sense of purpose that I had never experienced. Lectures, meetings, and sessions with people who were afraid of death became an extension of my new mission. I often saw skepticism in their eyes, like a reflection of who I was before. But when I shared my story, I saw those same eyes soften and occasionally tears flowed. One day, during one of my lectures, a young man asked me, "Dr. Caulfield, after everything you've seen, are you still afraid of death?" I smiled, remembering the light, the tunnel, and the touch of Jesus. "No," I replied, "because I know that death is not the end, but a transition. Love is what remains, and it is eternal." Today, when I look back, I see life as a journey filled with opportunities for growth, learning, and connection. My NDE was not just an experience, it was an invitation to live more fully, more consciously. And if there's one message I want to leave with those who hear my story, it's this: every life matters, every choice matters, and above all, love is the greatest force there is. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.